All right. Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Stacy, and I serve as the AmeriCorps member with Coastal Carolina Riverwatch. As the Water Quality for Fisheries Community Ambassador, I support community outreach and education focused on protecting the health of our waterways and the communities that depend on them. Coastal Carolina is a small nonprofit organization committed to protecting water quality and enhancing the quality of life along the North Carolina coast through advocacy, education, and action. We work collaboratively with residents, scientists, and decision makers to address the complex challenges facing our coastal ecosystem, which ranges from everything from stormwater runoff and marine debris to sea level rise and sustainable fisheries. Tonight, we are thrilled to host Dr. Christine Voss, a retired research associate at the UNC Chapel Hill Institute of Marine Sciences. Dr. Voss is a leading coastal ecologist whose research explores how sea level rise, habitat alteration, and food web dynamics shape the health of estuarine and marine environments. Her work not only advances science, but also informs real-world strategies for environmental management and resilience planning. We're grateful to have her with us this evening to guide us through a deeper understanding of the king tides, what they are, why they matter, and how they offer a glimpse into the future of our coastlines. Thanks for being here.
Certainly. Are we ready to dig in? So there is, I guess, at the bottom of your screen, if you wish to mute yourself or turn off your camera, do whatever you're comfortable with. When I'm giving the presentation, I won't be able to see you. If anybody raises their hand or anything, feel free to put something in the chat, or you can unmute yourself. Really, this looks like a fairly small group. I think we were expecting some more people, but if there's something during the presentation you want to ask a question, you're welcome to do that. Generally hold questions to the end, but if there's something that is just pressing, feel free to go ahead and ask. I can always go back to a certain slide as well. Okay, are we ready? We're gonna share my screen and hope that the technology works. And I think it is. And I'm gonna start a PowerPoint. Can everybody see this all right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Great. So thank you, Coastal Carolina Riverwatch, for having me talk about king tides. The North Carolina King Tides Project started as part of a NOAA project back in 2015. And there's, like with any project, let me get this hidden off my screen. Like with any project, there's really a collaborative team that make things happen. So the NOAA entity is the National Centers for Coastal Ocean Science. I was with UNC Chapel Hill Institute of Marine Sciences. Tonight we're working with Coastal Carolina Riverwatch, and a lot of this work has also been helped and assisted by Wetlands Watch. So I'm going to start with the big picture, our big blue marble. And I do that because I think every now and then you need to kind of take a broad perspective. We humans are terrestrial beings, and we tend to think of everything on Earth from the land-based perspective. But it pays to stop every now and then and realize that about 72% of our planet's surface is covered by water. And that can definitely change your perspective. I would like you also to notice the moon in this photograph. The moon is a heavenly body that has great influence on the waters of the earth. And interestingly, this picture also, if you look around Baja, California, I'm pretty sure that was Hurricane Patricia, which was responsible for having the highest recorded hurricane winds on the planet at 215 miles per hour. I hope none of us get to experience that, but it's just kind of an interesting picture for that reason. So this is our planet. This is home. This is what we have to work with. Our global temperatures have been increasing and accelerating, especially since the industrial era. And if you look in geological time, the CO2 levels in our atmosphere have increased to levels that, as far as we know, Earth has not experienced for at least 400 100,000 years. There's a really close correlation between the temperature, global temperatures, and global carbon dioxide levels. And there's a lot more to this, but I just wanted to make you aware of the relationship with global increases in temperature and global increases in CO2. So I pull up an image from the Climate Central showing global temperatures over about the same time era. And you can kind of see that the white is the mean temperatures for the period. And you can see a warming by the warming of colors over time. And I'm going to show you images for about that same time period from North Carolina. And you can see the noise, if you will, in those data, that there's a great deal of variability. And I point this out because where you are really influences how you interpret what we're hearing about global warming. I could see why someone in parts of North Carolina might question this, but it pays also to go back and realize what perspective you're taking, and our globe is warming. So along with these warming temperatures, sea level has risen. I like this graph because it shows the period in the 1900s through beyond 2000. And it shows the rate of rise accelerating over time. If we look at why are waters sea level increasing with temperature, and we can see that a significant part of that is due to shear physics, the thermal expansion of water. When water gets warm, it expands and takes up more space. We also had the addition of water from glaciers and ice melt, that the ice that is on land melting and adding to the sea level. There's also a graph to show from NOAA, and it shows the increases over a narrower period of time, more recent period of time, but it shows the acceleration fairly well. And you do see some of the noise in water levels here as well. I'm going to point out that here in North Carolina and the Central Coast, the NOAA gauge in Beaufort, North Carolina, has been around since, I believe, the late 1800s. And there's a group of us that are doing some work in marshes, and we took the water level data from January 2002 through December 2020. And over that 19-year period, sea level rise was raising at a rate of 8.8 millimeters per year. This is quite a bit higher than what they're now saying about 4.4 millimeters a year. Here in the graph, this 0.42 centimeters would be 4.2 centimeters a year. Over this 19-year period here in central North Carolina, that means that sea level between January of 2002 and December of 2020 has risen about 6.58 inches. So it doesn't seem like that much, but if you think about that rate of rise, it is significant. And I don't want to dwell too much about sea level rise, but it is part of the story. The other part of the story is when you think back to that blue marble, humans have always loved the coast. Has always been a great source of resources, both on the terrestrial and the marine side, but we still spend, and a lot of us live at the coast. About 50% of our population in the US, as well as globally, lives on the edge, lives along the coast. So we have an interaction between where people set up home and the rising sea. So I bring in North Carolina King Tides, which is part of the International King Tides Project. And the King Tides tries to help people all over the world understand how sea level will impact their lives. Basically, we use a natural phenomena that is predictable, and I'll get into explaining this. We use the highest tides of the year to help us visualize what future water levels will look like. And we try to document that in several different ways. We've done that through tide gauge data, but also through photography. So this logo for king tides is snap the shore, see the future. What is a king tide? So king tide is not a scientific term. It is one that scientists usually dislike, but it is a term that's commonly used. So for at least our king tides project, we like to define it as the Perigean spring tide. We'll break that down. Most folks who live in the coast have heard of spring tide. That's either new moon or full moon. And perigee explains the moon's position with the earth. So the moon has an elliptical orbit around the earth. And when the moon is physically closest to earth, it is in perigee. When it's furthest from the earth, it is in apogee. So during a Perigean spring tide, the sun, earth, and moon are all aligned. And therefore those heavenly bodies have an effect, a gravitational pull on the earth and move its water. And we experience the highest tides and the lowest tides of the year. We can have multiple king tides in a year. There's a lot of other factors involved, but I'm trying to simplify this and hit the highlights, the most important information. Here's a copy of the 2025 North Carolina King Tides calendar. I think this is probably very similar for other parts of the country. You're welcome to use it, and I will talk in a minute about looking at your your NOAA tide gauge data online, because that can be really helpful. But you'll see here on the King Tides calendar that for each month we try to highlight and note the full moon, the new moon, and perigee. So when coming up here on Sunday, moon will occur the same day or within 24 hours of perigee. So that's referred to as a super new moon. So that's when we have these extremely high and extremely low water level events. Let's take a look at July for a minute. We can see that the lunar perigee occurs on a Sunday, and later on that week, there's a new moon. So those events occur about 4 days apart, but it does result in a higher than normal water levels, but doesn't really meet the benchmark for a king tide. What we don't clearly show is that perigee it varies in its degree. Even though perigee is the closest the moon is to the earth in a given month, that distance does vary from month to month as well. So there's sometimes, such as in April, where perigee is strong because the moon is extra close. There's times in July where perigee, not only does perigee and a new moon differ by 4 days, but perigee is actually weaker in July this year. So what happens during king tides? The idea is to use these predictable higher water levels to help us, again, to visualize what future sea levels will look like. So this is also sometimes called sunny day flooding, because this is generally not storm related. Some of these photographs you might see cloudy skies, but the king tide events have nothing to do with meteorology. They only have to do with the astronomical forcing of the moon and the sun relative to the earth. Here's a picture of the west end of Front Street in Beaufort. Somebody was saying that during king tides, it's hard to get by in Beaufort. Even parts of Morehead City that can be true, which is this picture in the lower right. So I'm going to focus here on North Carolina. If you look at the east coast of the US, North Carolina and actually eastern Florida is pretty similar in being what the geologists would call microtidal. Our difference between high and low tide is relatively low compared to some areas. If we would look in southern South Carolina and Georgia, the tidal difference between high and low tide are several feet. But in North Carolina, in the Beaufort area, the difference between high and low tide are only about 3 foot. Down in the Wilmington area, difference between high and low tide might be closer to 4 foot. And if you think about our coast, we have 300 miles of coast here, and we have these big water bodies such as this is the Albemarle and Pamlico Sounds, and very few inlets where water from the ocean can exchange with these estuaries. So there is less astronomical tidal forcing occurring inside some of these big open water areas. And wind actually has more influence. So you'll hear during a northeast southern that they're talking about flooding in Oriental and all the way up to New Bern at times. And if we have a strong southwest, wind, often with summer storms, there'll be flooding on the backside of the Outer Banks. So in North Carolina, we have a microtidal system. So that's the astronomical forcing. That's the effects of the sun and the moon on Earth. Move our water, but only to a certain degree. Depends, and the amount of that influence depends on where you are within the estuary. And wind, meteorology, I should say, but that's largely wind direction, speed, and duration can have a great effect on water level. I'm also want to talk to you about the effects of the Gulf Stream. Here is a sea surface temperature map, and you can see the Gulf Stream coming from the southern tip of Florida, coming up the east coast to about Cape Hatteras, and then it makes a crossing over to Europe. And as it comes up here, it holds it when the Gulf Stream is out from or offshore from Florida, it holds its longitudinal position fairly well. But this stream that is very forceful, it can sit about a meter or at least 3 foot higher than the surrounding ocean. It's such a strong current. And when it comes up the coast, it can meander. So when this wall of water, I'm going to say boogies to the west, it pushes a wall of water up against our shore, and water levels can be higher than predicted. This can also occur when the flow rate of the Gulf Stream slows, which happens from time to time. And the oceanographers are trying to still figure all this out. There are times when the Gulf Stream actually moves further offshore a little bit, and our water levels are lower than predicted. So in North Carolina, another factor could be the Gulf Stream's position and flow rate. And I just wanted to show you this. You probably had this back in school where you looked at all of the ocean currents. But this is the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, or AMOC, is a current that has been changing in its flow rate and changing in its circulation patterns. And this is likely impacting the Gulf Stream. We're getting more information about that all the time, but there could be changes if we heat the planet such that we actually affect ocean circulation. We could have other issues that we'll be learning about. Depending on where you are, maybe in Florida, but especially in North Carolina, if your water levels can also be affected by river flow. So one of the things that the North Carolina King Tides program want people to understand what forces, what influences those water levels around you, and to be aware of it. And when we have high tide events, king tide events, and we take photographs, sometimes those photographs have actually been used to help governing bodies such as municipalities and county governments to understand where some of their flooding problems are. So it's really a two-way communication. Here are some hydrographs, and I know this is kind of confusing, but let me break it down. The blue lines are water level. The upper graph was taken from water level station up here at Cedar Island National Wildlife Refuge at the Lola Road ramp. During the same time period, there's data at the bottom from the sound side of the aquarium in Pine Knoll Shores. You can see the regular semi-diurnal, 2 high tides, 2 low tides a day, water level data. The black line is barometric pressure. So these two sites are only about 35 miles apart as the crow flies. Yet, isn't it interesting how dramatically different the water level and the water level patterns are? Here at the top, the astronomical or tidal signal only explains 23% of the water level. We assume that the rest of it is probably wind, the wind driving the system. It could also be barometric pressure to some degree as well. At the bottom, the water level is much more regular, but the astronomical or tidal signal explains 59% of these data. So I show this for you to see the drastic difference in fairly close, in water level within fairly close geographical proximity, and realize that there are different things that affect water level. And in North Carolina, if you live on a North Carolina estuary, you really need to be aware of what is influencing water level for you. Here's a hydrograph at the top from just, I believe it was just yesterday, from the Duke Marine Lab, the Beaufort tide gauge. The blue data are tide predictions, water level predictions. The red are actual data that have come in. And I just wanted to show you here that you, whoops, I didn't mean to do that just yet. Sorry. Here you can see where water levels were actually running lower than predicted. And I would venture to guess that was probably an effect of the Gulf Stream. Here's an area where those water levels were running higher than predicted. Gulf Stream was probably running further, closer to shore. And just past couple of days, water levels have been running right about where predicted. And this is the same station. This is water level from mid-April to mid-May. And I just wanted to point out this area here where you can see the extremely high and extremely low water levels. So this is the king tide. We have a mixed semi-diurnal system in just about everywhere in North Carolina, where we have one high tide that's higher than the other and one low tide that's lower than the other each tidal cycle or each day. So here is some information from that tide gauge. This is a major one in North Carolina. The Wilmington gauge is our oldest, but this is the second oldest. And I wanted just to show you, not that you have to read all this, but there are 37 astronomical harmonic constituents that go into these tide predictions. So these are all factors that account for the angle of the Earth, the angle of the moon, and the angle of the sun, distance of Earth to the sun, to the moon, and all those factors together. So there's a lot of highly technical data that go into tide predictions. And those tide predictions can only account for the astronomical forcing. Very short-term water level predictions, like those done for hurricanes or storm surge, those do incorporate meteorology as well, or they do their best, but they usually can only be very accurate for about 48 hours in advance. So I'm encouraging you, if you get a chance, to go to NOAA. It's actually the Tides and Currents website, and you can click on your state and look at the tide gauges near you, and there's a whole wealth of information there. When we started the King Tides project, there were relatively few gauges on the North Carolina coast. We had the USGS gauges shown here in blue that are kind of the river, they're the river gauges, and they generally ended where the rivers became wide. There's also the pink here are the few NOAA stations that we have. NOAA would like to put more stations up, but it's expensive. And because of the several big hurricanes we've had, our Department of Emergency Management has been actually much better than this, and they have the green stations. They've been incorporating more stations. When this project was fully funded and we had a lot of people actually measuring water level, we had all these stations in yellow were added. So the project is no longer funded, but we have had a group of volunteers keeping things going. And I wanted to point out on the website, you can look at where our public gauges are, such as this one here at Big Rock Landing. And it's very simple. There's a simple gauge and there's a card nearby. There's a QR code. You can just, with your camera, you can go to the website, download an app, and record what you're seeing there and record those data. All the data that we get have a latitude, longitude, and a date and time stamp. With that information, along with something that has a vertical reference, such as our gauges, we can look and compare water levels across space and time. Here's another one from Oriental and Pamlico County, just so you can see what the card looks like. But you can go to the North Carolina King Tides website and see where more of these public, gauges are if they're of interest to you. So just talking about the North Carolina King Tides project, these photos provide a glimpse into the future, helping us to compare what current water levels, this is from Wrightsville Beach, and this is during a king tide, what normal versus possibly future water levels look like. And the project has benefited coastal communities and has helped people hopefully participate in some more proactive planning. I'm going to show you just a few of the photographs that have been interesting over time. This is back from 2015. You can see it's a beautiful sunny day. This is a North Carolina Seafood Festival where thousands of people come down from across the state and elsewhere. And there's always been an educational tent, but it was flooded this particular year. And the water did not come over the sides, or basically Bogue Sound did not spill into the streets, but the water came up the storm drains from this historically old town. There are some times where there's going to be storms, and if a storm occurs during a king tide event, we have extremely high water levels. Here's another sunny day in Morehead City with water filling the streets. I believe this is from Carolina Beach. This here is from Cedar Island. And I believe this is Carolina Beach as well, these others. I'll keep moving along. So it has been helpful to have this imagery and to compare it with the tide gauge data. And the National Weather Service puts out graphs like the one below, so they can kind of alert you when minor, moderate, or major flooding is likely to occur. And we can, again, with that time and date stamp and say, okay, this is when we have a gauge that says water levels are here, this is what it looks like. So when you take pictures and you do submit information, it is very helpful. We have two apps that we're currently using. There's the Sea Level Rise app and the Coastal Observer app. The Coastal Observer app was developed by some colleagues at the University of Delaware, and it looks at the vertical extent of flooding. The Sea Level Rise app has been developed by colleagues in Virginia at the Wetlands Watch, and it looks at the horizontal extent of flooding. These are easy to use apps. There is information on our website. I know that Stacy said that having a non-Apple phone, she's recently had trouble using the Coastal Observer app, but I wanted to at least introduce that to folks. The Sea Level Rise app has been used, and I believe that's the one that you're welcome to use either of the apps. They're still supported, and you're welcome to use any of those. I think Stacy's going to be talking about some planned mapping for this coming weekend.